DAB Plus on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Put your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa!
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I'm Lisa Hartle in the GB Newsroom. Gaza has been hit with a fresh wave of airstrikes. A number of explosions have been seen after Israel issued a warning to residents to leave the area. Leaflets were dropped in the north of the Strip saying if they stayed, their life was in danger and they may be identified as terrorist sympathisers. Earlier, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu told troops the war against Hamas is do or die for his country. Israel Defense Forces spokesman Lieutenant Colonel Peter Lerner says it's a complex mission.
We know how extensive their tunnel mechanisms is and how they are operating and using them. So we're confident we have good intelligence, but the realm of warfare is it's not the known knowns, it's the unknown knowns. And so we know that we have a brutal enemy. We don't know exactly what they're doing. We have a good grasp of their operational capabilities, and we need to confront that and remove that as if it was a tumour.
Former head of the Palestinian diplomatic mission to the UK, Manuel Hassas-Ian, says he still believes in a two-state solution.
Don't try to put us, all in a frame that we are terrorists as Palestinians. There is a difference between the Palestinian people who want peace and security, and there is a difference between the Palestinian Authority, which is the legitimate representative of the Palestinian people, who believe in a two-state solution, who have condemned violence all along. The question is, can Israel stop state terrorism on equal basis? That's a question.
Witnesses also say they heard a blast and the sound of ambulances near the Rafah crossing. It happened after a second convoy of aid was allowed to enter Gaza. Yesterday, 20 trucks delivered supplies to the Strip after the border with Egypt was opened for the first time in 2 weeks. In London, an Israel solidarity rally is being held in Trafalgar Square. The Bring Them Home protest is calling for the release of all hostages being held by Hamas. Earlier, a man was arrested for allegedly shouting anti-Semitic abuse from a car driving past. It comes after days of pro-Palestinian protests and claims some people have been inciting violence. Immigration Minister Robert Jenrick says the accusations are being taken seriously.
I've written to all chief constables across the country saying that they should refer individuals that come to their attention to the Home Office. There is a legal process to be followed, but as and when we receive those, we will consider them, and if they meet the legal bar, then we will absolutely revoke and expel them, and the first case is already under consideration.
In other news, 2 danger to life weather warnings have been issued in England in the wake of Storm Babet. Severe flood alerts are in place around the River Idle near Retford in Nottinghamshire, which is expected to reach record levels. The number of people who've died during the storm has risen to 4 after police found the body of a woman in her 80s in Chesterfield. Manchester United has opened a book of condolence at Old Trafford following the death of Sir Bobby Charlton. The legendary footballer was a key member of England's World Cup winning team in 1966. Floral tributes and football shirts are being placed outside the Manchester United Stadium, with his former club saying he'll always be remembered as a giant of the game. Fans have also been sharing their fondest memories of Sir Bobby.
I saw him play maybe 20 times in the early 70s before he retired. The greatest player in the world, really. I mean, he's up there with Pele.
Very sad to see such a great man and a great footballer pass.
Just shocked, really. You know, he's been part of my life. Get a bit choked. While I've been growing up, you know, I've been following United and all the great things. It's always involved Bobby Charlton.
This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. Now it's time for the Camilla Tominey Show.
A very good morning to you. It's 9:30 on Sunday morning. I'm Tom Harwood and welcome to the Camilla Tominey Show. I'm presenting this week, but don't worry, Camilla will be back in this seat next Sunday. Let's turn now to Sean Woodward, the former Northern Ireland Secretary under Gordon Brown, for what has been an interesting week. Sean, I know that you talk to senior figures in and around the Labour Party leadership, and the Labour Party does seem to be rather ahead in the polls. 2 extraordinary by-election wins in the last week. Is this a sign of things to come? Are we heading for a 1997-style Labour landslide?
Really good question, Tom, and good morning to you. I think everybody needs to remember that we're probably a good year out from a general election happening, and I've been around for long enough to know that in a year things can change quite dramatically. But I think what happened this week in those 2 by-elections, where majorities of 19,000 and 24,000 were overturned, is that probably if we're standing back and looking at things and saying what's likely to happen, I don't think this is any longer looking like the 1992 election when John Major was up against Neil Kinnock. Nobody quite knew who was going to win, and John Major just managed to squeak back in, and I actually ran that general election campaign for him. So I have a pretty much kind of good eye on that one. I think this is looking like 97. Something here is happening. And listening to your People's panel just then, people are giving up on the Conservative Party in government. And listening to the gentleman who your reporter was interviewing in the cafe, his remarks, he thought that the party was going to get trounced. And I have to say, with huge respect to people who will be looking at this and trying to find a reason to justify how Rishi can manage it, it's looking very hard to me for him to win this election.
I suppose it is a difficult position for the government to be in, but Sir Keir Starmer has perhaps been a lucky general in the last 2 years. His opponents have run into big problems, whether it's the SNP and their internal turmoil, or indeed the Conservative Party and their civil war. Has the Labour Party done enough to distinguish Sir Keir Starmer, to bring about positive votes for the Labour Party? Or is this just Sir Keir winning by default?
Look, good question, Tom. But I mean, you are a seasoned political analyst here. And I think what you and I would be saying to each other is that basically in a general election, governments lose elections, oppositions never win them. It's a question of how badly the government loses and therefore how well the opposition wins. Now, an opposition can contribute to its defeat, and I would say that Jeremy Corbyn frightened people at the last general election. So Boris Johnson did even better than people were expecting him to do. But what's happened now is that the cost of living crisis that, again, your panel referred to, the problems that people are seeing in the NHS with 7.5 million people waiting for treatment, people, if they have a cardiac arrest, probably quite unlikely in some parts of the country to have an ambulance in time before they die. These things are contributing to a sense that the government doesn't have answers. And I think what that means is that you're seeing, just like your People's Panel, people talking about a cliff edge if they're a swing voter. But that's an interesting phrase, isn't it? A cliff edge isn't like nearly there. It's a massive jump. And I think what we're probably going to see is a victory for Keir Starmer that is very big. But it will also be because the country's given up on 13 years of a Conservative Party, which they think is economically bankrupt.
And yet some big problems for a Labour government if it were to take office. It says it would stick more or less to Tory spending limits. The big plan that Labour has for the NHS is to spend a whole 0.5% more on its budget. That's not going to fix the waiting lists. Is the Labour Party setting itself up for just as unsuccessful, arguably, a period of government giving these enormous international headwinds?
No, I think what the Labour Party is rightly doing is ensuring that you don't frighten people. Because most people are pretty intelligent out there. I mean, when I used to be the boss of That's Life programme with Esther Ramson, Esther always used to say, assume that most people are incredibly smart and bright. They just don't have the information. So the information that the Labour Party is giving people is, look, it's going to take a long time to fix these problems. There's no sudden large amount of money to do it. We need to change some of our goals. We need, for example, to move the NHS from something that's constantly trying to fix people to trying to prevent them becoming ill in the first place. So doing cancer scans on people at an early stage rather than waiting for them to have stage 4 metastatic cancer.
Now,
and that's a very expensive thing to treat.
In here because we are short on time, and I don't want to miss your view on this next very important subject, which is, of course, the situation in the Middle East. You were Northern Ireland Secretary, overseeing the peace process in a difficult and previously war-torn part of this country. What's your view on how there could possibly be peace now between Israel and Palestine?
Well, I always travel in hope, Tom. I mean, I think if we travel only in despair, then we have a danger of fulfilling the worst of our imaginations. And ultimately, the fact that the rest of the world wants to engage in the problems of the Middle East is the best sign of hope, because they don't have a solution that works there right now, because the situation both in Israel and in Gaza is so catastrophic. It's catastrophic for all of those families. Whether you're a mum in Jerusalem or a mum in Gaza, you are terrified for what's happening to your family. But, and I think this is a big but, the fact that we've seen the President of the United States fly in, the fact that we're seeing the involvement of Saudi Arabia, Middle Eastern countries, the fact that we're seeing European countries coming in to want to help, ultimately is a sign of hope. Because ultimately, as we found in Northern Ireland, most people living in Gaza, living in Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, don't want this. And so long as most people don't want this, there's hope for a resolution, but it won't be tomorrow morning.
On that sign of hope, Sean Woodward, former Northern Ireland Secretary, I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much, though, for your views and perspective. Now, don't go anywhere. We're going to be speaking to the Immigration Minister, Robert Jenrick, after this.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Ah!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Ah.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour, Sunday the 29th of October at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute? Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. You're watching the Camilla Tominey Show with me, Tom Harwood. Now, our next guest is Robert Jenrick, the Immigration Minister and, of course, Member of Parliament for Newark. Robert, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Let's dive straight in with something that you have done this week. 2 days ago, you wrote to every Chief Constable in England and Wales saying to refer people who have spoken out in support of the proscribed terrorist group Hamas, to refer them to the Home Office to potentially revoke the visas of those who support this organisation. How many people have been referred?
Well, good morning, Tom. Yes, it's very important to me and the Home Secretary that people who spread hate or support proscribed terrorist organisations like Hamas have no place in this country. A visa is a special privilege. It's not an entitlement, and if you commit comments that create hate or spread anti-Semitism, then you forfeit that privilege and you should have that visa revoked and you should be expelled from the UK. I've written to all chief constables across the country saying that they should refer individuals that come to their attention to the Home Office. There is a legal process to be followed, but as and when we receive those, we will consider them, and if they meet the legal bar, then we will absolutely revoke and expel them, and the first case is already under consideration.
Was that the first case or the first cases? Should I take from that that one referral has been made?
No, there have been a number of referrals, and the first cases are being considered by the Home Office. I can't comment on the individual cases, but please be in absolutely no doubt of how strongly we feel that those people who commit these crimes, people who spread hate in our country, they should be removed. They shouldn't have a right to live in the UK and harm our citizens and British values.
That was very clear. Thank you for that. Now, the Jewish community in the UK, particularly perhaps the Jewish community in London, has been the victim of some terrible, terrible instances of open hatred on the streets of London. It's led some people to suggest that the remarks of your boss, Suella Braverman, perhaps weren't that wide of the mark when she suggested that multiculturalism in the United Kingdom has failed.
Well, firstly, we're going to do everything we can to support British Jews and to fight anti-Semitism. That's why we've given further funding to the Community Security Trust, who help to protect synagogues and Jewish schools. That's why we're working closely with the police and the Crown Prosecution Service to encourage them to rigorously and robustly enforce our laws so that individuals who fall below them are brought to justice. But it is more than just a question of legality. As you say, it's also a question about values. And some of the things we've seen over the course of the last 2 weeks do speak to a failure of some people in our country to live up to British values of civility and common decency, and have shown that there are issues of integration in our country. And it would be foolish of us to deny those or to bury our heads in the sand. We've got to confront them head on and ensure that we are a united and cohesive society.
Do those failures of integration and failures of some individuals to live up to the British values that you speak about, does that in your book reach the level of a failure of multiculturalism?
Well, I think that the UK is broadly one of the most successful multiracial democracies in the world. But as I say, we would be doing ourselves a disservice if we fooled ourselves into thinking that there weren't pockets of serious failure of integration and individuals who fall well below the standards that we should expect. Diversity is not a strength in and of itself. It is good in moderation, but we've got to ensure that we can successfully integrate individuals into our country so that there is a common sense of what it is to be British and a common sense of British values. That's what I want to see, and I think the pace of immigration over recent decades has been too fast, and we've struggled as a country to do integration as well as we should have done. That, I think, is what Suella Braverman was saying, and I fully support her.
Well, on from migration now to refugees, another part of your brief, because the First Minister of Scotland, Humza Yousaf, has called on, has said that he would be willing and able for Scotland to take in refugees from Gaza. Would the United Kingdom do the same across the country?
Well, I think that's premature. The first step is to help British nationals out of Gaza and into safety. We're working extremely hard, the Foreign Office and the Home Office, to secure the safe passage of those British nationals, working with Egypt and other neighbouring countries. That is critical at the moment. The second task, of course, alongside that, is to get humanitarian aid into Gaza. And we've had the first welcome step in that regard yesterday, with some trucks going through the Rafah crossing, providing essential food and medical supplies. We've got to ensure that they aren't diverted by Hamas, and they have a history of doing that. We need to get more supplies through to Gaza. And I don't think that the first thing we should leap to whenever there is a crisis in the world is migration. The UK should be a big-hearted nation that plays an important role in supporting people in difficult situations, but usually it is best to do that through diplomacy and through development aid.
Now you say that it's premature to talk about this, but I note, Robert Jenrick, that you're not ruling out taking non-British refugees from Gaza.
Well, I said we don't have a plan to do that, and the point I just made was that I don't think that that is the right approach. What we should be doing is using the assets of the UK, which is our relationships with countries like Egypt and Israel, and our development aid to support as many vulnerable people as possible in Gaza, rather than creating small schemes to privilege a small number of people. The priority is to get the British nationals out and humanitarian aid in a way which means it is not diverted and abused by the terrorist organisation Hamas.
Well, Robert Jenrick, that's all we have time for, but thank you very much for speaking to us here on GB News on the Camilla Tominey programme. That was Robert Jenrick, the Immigration Minister, of course. Well, there is so much more to come this hour, and don't forget, of course, in this enormous week in Middle Eastern politics, I'll be speaking to both the former Israeli ambassador to the United Kingdom and the former head of the Palestinian diplomatic mission to the United Kingdom as well.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to ordinary people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only three people you can trust in life: your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle. Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new teeth.
It's your new teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is two new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GB News.
Now, I'm going to be speaking to a former representative to the UK of both Israel and the Palestinian Authority. First, let's hear from Daniel Taub, who served as Israeli ambassador to the UK from 2011 to 2015. He joins me from Tel Aviv, and thank you so much for making the time for us today, and I hope you're staying safe there in Israel. First of all, do you have a message for the British people this morning from Israel? And perhaps particularly for the Jewish community in the United Kingdom?
Hi, Tom. Good to be with you. Just to clarify, I'm speaking to you from Jerusalem, not from Tel Aviv, just down the road. I think my message to the Jewish community and to the general British population is actually the same message. We are going through one of the darkest times that Israel has had. But one of the points of light is the absolute moral clarity that we are seeing from our friends and leaders, throughout Europe, the United States, and so on. There's a tremendous amount of suffering and grief within Israel, and we know that Palestinians are also suffering. But there is no equivalence, no way of making a comparison between Israelis who are doing everything they can to save the lives of Israelis and limit the damage to civilians in the Gaza Strip, and Hamas, this terrorist organization that targets civilians in the Israeli side and brutally abuses Palestinians on the other side. So we really call for people to hold fast to that clarity at this point in time.
There, of course, can be no equivalence made between the prescribed terror group Hamas and the democratic state of Israel. There have, however, been criticisms of the way in which Israel has been conducting its response, particularly when it comes to cutting off water and electricity supplies. Politicians in the United Kingdom have sort of flip-flopped on their support for this measure. Is it going too far?
As you know, we have been working very closely with the international community to try and make sure that supplies, humanitarian access, reaches the Palestinians of the Gaza Strip, particularly in the south. But we're also aware that to date, in the 16 years since Israel pulled out of every inch of the Gaza Strip, humanitarian aid, and that's including European aid, has been hijacked and abused by the Hamas terrorist organization. And I, Tom, don't know any country that would continue to supply electricity to a territory where terror organizations are using that same electricity to build, manufacture, and fire the missiles that's in firing on Israeli civilians.
I suppose the problem here is it's so difficult to tell the embedded Hamas terror groups within Gaza from the hundreds of thousands of innocent civilians. And isn't that the crux of the problem, that given the right of Israel to defend itself and the strikes that have been made, there will, of course, be innocent civilians tied up in this? How does Israel navigate that path?
So first of all, the crux of the problem, sadly, is that we have an Iranian-sponsored terrorist organization embedded in the Gaza Strip, taking its own population hostage. But you're right, Tom, to focus on the fact that not only does it abuse our civilians, the atrocities that we've seen, the abuse of firing people with inside, shooting at people with inside ambulances, but in the Gaza Strip, it claims to have 100,000 militants. None of them wear uniforms. None of them separate themselves from the civilian population. In those circumstances, we do everything we can to try and separate the civilians. We've been urging the civilians to move south so they'll be out of the area of entrenched terrorist occupation there in the Gaza Strip. Sadly, we know that Hamas is forcing many of them to stay. It's locking some of them up. I heard this morning that it is actually throwing away people's car keys. I mean, that's a horrendous situation, but we cannot allow this tactic to succeed. And we need to keep our minds on the fact that after this war is over, the situation, not just for Israelis, but for the people of Gaza, will be infinitely better if Hamas, this terrorist, brutal organization, is not embedded within this area.
I suppose one of the problems here is that there is a genuine sense of fear from people in Gaza, perhaps people who have been driven to more extreme means because the progress towards a two-state solution simply hasn't been being made. In many ways, things have been going backwards. Does Israel still believe in a two-state solution?
So, Tom, I think we need to get the history right here. You know, if you remember, Israel pulled out of the Gaza Strip entirely. At that time, there were no restrictions on the Gaza Strip. The border with Egypt was run by an EU mission called the EU-BAM mission. You know, Palestinians had free passage of trade and so on and so forth. And it was only the fact that Hamas used the territory that we pulled out of to launch repeated attacks against us that actually meant that restrictions were necessary. The original plan when Israel pulled out of the Gaza Strip was to lead to further withdrawals, to try and advance a peace treaty or peace arrangement between Israelis and Palestinians. But I think you're right. When Israelis look today and they see that every area that Israel has pulled out of, whether it's the Gaza Strip, whether it's in South Lebanon, and we've pulled out in return for or promises from the international community and the hope that the local populations will actually use this as an opportunity for prosperity. And instead, we've seen Iranian-sponsored proxies actually using these areas as basis for repeated attacks against Israel. I have to say the prospects for further withdrawals don't look promising.
Now, of course, you conducted negotiations with the Palestinian Authority around the time of that withdrawal from Gaza. Do you now see that withdrawal as a mistake, given it clearly led to the rise of Hamas?
If you remember, it didn't immediately lead to the rise of Hamas. You know, it was 2 years later. The Hamas actually had a sort of fictitious win in elections and then brutalized the regime, threw the Palestinian Authority officials off the roofs and so on and so forth. The fact is, a peace will not keep itself. A peace needs to be maintained with effort from both sides. Sadly, we haven't seen the will from the Palestinian Authority to take a firm hand, both against the Hamas terrorist organizations and against the indoctrination of its own children. Sadly, we know that there are a generation of youngsters that have been taught that jihad, that suicide bombers, is one of the highest values. I mean, it's a horrendous form of child abuse that you send your child to school, and the people that are held up as its heroes are these jihadi suicide bombers. When we see young Palestinians brought up to actually hold up constructive models of heroism, people who have tried to build their society rather than pull down ours, I think Israelis will have a greater confidence in the possibility of peace.
It seems peace in the Middle East is a lot further away today than it was perhaps a month ago. Ironically, it might well have been the march towards normalization of relations with Israel and surrounding countries, an extension of those Abraham Accords that sparked this horrific Hamas terror attack in the first place, likely promoted by Iran. Can you see in your lifetime any normalization, any de-escalation of the clear tensions that have come so forthright in the last 2 weeks?
So I think we do have to hold fast to the possibility of hope. I mean, I think if you look in our region, one of the lessons that we can learn is that it's very hard to reach peace, but when you do reach peace, it's more resilient than you might have thought. We have peace treaties with Egypt and with Jordan, which have held fast despite the Arab Spring and all sorts of upheavals in the region. We have, as you pointed out, Tom, we have peaceful relations with a number of Gulf states. We have a very important rapprochement process with Saudi Arabia, which may itself have been part of the Iranian calculus. It is so clear to anybody who looks at the region that if you are forward-looking, if you care about your children, peace brings such extraordinary dividends in terms of cooperation, in terms of shared resources. We just need to try and strengthen those people who care more about their children than destroying ours.
Well, Daniel Taub, I thank you so much for your participation in the programme this morning, live from Jerusalem, not from Tel Aviv, as we originally said. Really interesting stuff there, but let's see if we can get the other side, the other perspective now from Manuel Hassassian, the former head of the Palestinian diplomatic mission to the United Kingdom. He joins me this morning from Copenhagen. Thank you so much for making the time for us this morning. I do want to start off by putting to you directly a claim made there by Daniel Taub that perhaps the Palestinian Authority has missed a trick by not getting a firm hand on Hamas, by not controlling the Palestinian territory in a way that perhaps it should. Has the Palestinian Authority been too weak on Hamas?
The question is not being too weak or strong. What happened is that Hamas was created actually by the consent of the Israelis to concoct an alternative leadership to the PLO. And that took place during the first Intifada, where Hamas started, developing its military power, its political impact, it's getting, control of civil society to a certain extent. And unfortunately, in the year 2008, we had, the coup d'etat, which made Hamas took over Gaza. And since then, the Palestinian Authority does not have any control over Hamas. And of course, Hamas acts as a military wing. and we cannot control them. We have, as PLO, succumbed to the fact that politique réelle imposed on us to have peace with the Israelis. So we went ahead with political accommodation, and for the last 30 years we have been talking about two-state solution, and that two-state solution, unfortunately, has been now obliterated by the fact of the Israelis building settlements and moving settlers. Today we have 750,000 settlers in the West Bank, and the ongoing, occupation, of the daily lives of the Palestinians, not making it easy by killing them, extrajudicial building settlements, and what have you, had made it worse. For the last 13 years, there had been a total stalemate in the peace process since the advent of Netanyahu. Nothing happened on the ground, and we still, hope for a two-state solution. A two-state solution cannot really be, in fact, implemented if we have non-geographic contiguity in the West Bank, where, if you look at the West Bank, it's like a Swiss cheese map, where it is like archipelago islands with no geographic contiguity. How on earth can we have our, sovereign state with East Jerusalem, and let alone Gaza, which has its own unique circumstances, to have an independent state within the concept of the Oslo Agreement? So things are getting more difficult with the latest onslaught now on Gaza. I don't think there is a light at the end of the tunnel so far.
Of course, what Daniel Taub was saying there was that Israel's withdrawing from the West Bank in the mid-2000s is what made, or at least created, from Gaza, is what created the conditions whereby Hamas could come about. And to that extent, a similar withdrawal from the West Bank would risk a similar situation occurring on the other side of the country. Does he have a point?
Well, actually, when they withdrew from Gaza, it was a unilateral pullout. It was not negotiated by the Palestinian Authority in order to know exactly how to deal with it and how to connect that to the West Bank. It was unilateral. And once they moved, what they created is a besieged people. It's everybody, I started talking about 13 years ago about open-air concentration camp in Gaza. The connection between Gaza and the West Bank was totally curtailed by the Israelis. So there was no connection first. And second, when the coup d'etat took place, the Palestinian Authority, as an authority, was not there anymore. Now, we're not talking about factions being there, Fatah and what have you, but we're talking about authority. So Hamas took over.
Is it right to refer to, given the particular history of the Jewish people, is it right to refer to Gaza as a quote-unquote concentration camp? Isn't that a bit of a crass comparison, given that one of the borders of Gaza is with Egypt, an Arab country which also refuses to open the border because it doesn't want to let in many Gazan refugees?
Well, actually, Egypt has the right not to accept refugees. They are sovereign, and they made their decisions. And they believe that, opening the borders, meaning another displacement of the Palestinians, going into Sinai, another extra burden for them. And they don't want their a sense of guilt of decimation the entire Palestinian people through another Nakba, which has been taking place since 1948. So the Egyptians, out of political position, they don't want to be engaged in such a venture where eventually it will be attacked by the Arab world, by the Palestinians, by everybody. By opening the borders, it means that you are consenting to the fact of Israel to forcefully diasporize 1 million Palestinians, if not 2, to a country, to the desert, where they don't belong.
And just quickly, before we finish this interview, I want to give you an opportunity to, of course, condemn the horrific attacks that we saw from Hamas. And would you, perhaps, unlike some broadcasters in the United Kingdom, declare these as terrorist attacks?
Can I ask you a question? Because you asked me a question. You didn't ask Ambassador Tao to condemn what state terrorism is inflicting today on Gaza. And don't compare the occupied with the occupation, with the occupied, and don't try to put us, all in a frame that we are terrorists as Palestinians. There is a difference between the Palestinian people who want peace and security, and there is a difference between the Palestinian Authority, which is the legitimate representative of the Palestinian people, who believe in a two-state solution, who have condemned violence all along. The question is, can Israel stop state terrorism on equal basis?
Of course, I did question the former Israeli ambassador at length in terms of what would be a proportionate response and whether it was right or not to be cutting off water or indeed electricity. I asked him detailed questions there. I know you haven't responded to the question in terms of whether or not this should be condemned as a terrorist attack, the actions of Hamas 2 weeks ago.
Violence breeds violence. And the situation in Gaza was on a powder keg. And what happened basically is a retaliation on the daily atrocities that the Israelis with the settlers are committing against our innocent civilians in the West Bank, in Jerusalem, in Gaza, and what have you. So you want me to condemn violence while state terrorism, 56 of occupation, killing people, extrajudicial. Now you woke up to see that the other side is terrorist and violent and not Israel, which is an occupying power. I don't think this is a fair question.
OK, you don't think it's a fair question? That's clear enough. Manuel Hassassian, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate your perspective as well this morning.
We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Ah!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GB News.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to ordinary people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Well, we've had a huge array of guests so far this morning, but one thing that we haven't yet touched on is an anniversary that is coming up on Wednesday. That is 1 year since Rishi Sunak became the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. So who better to talk through this topic than Sir Anthony Seldon, the esteemed political historian. He's written a biographer of every Prime Minister since John Major, except for Liz Truss. I suppose have to first ask you, Sir Anthony, is a biography of Liz Truss on the way, or does 49 days perhaps not merit one?
Oh, it definitely merits one. I mean, it's fascinating. How could somebody who I think was very talented and who had more experience than most prime ministers coming to the office, she'd been around a lot, she knew what she wanted to do. How did it go so catastrophically wrong after just 49 days? There's a real story there. I mean, it's half the length of the next shortest serving prime minister, who was George Canning with nearly 120 days. And, you know, what happened? I love it. I mean, that's because I suppose I just love, I don't know, British history.
So perhaps that's the next book on the way. But turning to perhaps a longer-term perspective, you wrote earlier this year that King Charles's perspective is wiser and deeper than that of Rishi Sunak or Keir Starmer. Their horizons will always be tribal and short-term. Why do you think it is that King Charles perhaps has that deeper and more substantial vision than either the leader of the Labour Party or the Prime Minister?
Well, it's nothing against those two particular people, both of whom are, I think, obviously very talented. But King Charles started thinking about the country and its place in the world and how to get the best out of education and health and the environment before either of those leaders were born. And he learnt from the very best in the land, one of the best in the world, the best maybe, who was his mother, the Queen. And that kind of mentoring really matters. So that was the reason I said that. But look, I think that Rishi Sunak is just coming into power on an impossible wicket. And I think he's made some significant errors, but he's done some good things too. But above all, I don't think anybody would be doing any better than him.
That's interesting, and perhaps it leads some analysis or pre-analysis of what a first-term Keir Starmer administration might look like, perhaps very, very similar to what we've seen over the last 12 months. But you've also written this about Rishi Sunak, that he has been micromanaging for too long and needs to think more strategically. You say the best prime ministers have been inspirers and liberators, setting the direction rather than getting tangled up in the little details. Is that still your view of Rishi Sunak?
Well, he has tried, hasn't he, with his latest initiatives at the party conference, scrapping HS2 and redistributing that money into regional transport, and his decision on climate change and putting less immediate pain and pressure on taxpayers now and on drivers now, and his reforms for the A-levels. I mean, these are all good things, but it falls short of telling a story. The great prime ministers, I mean, we think of Churchill, we think of Clement Attlee, we think of Margaret Thatcher, all had a story to tell. Now, the story he told at the party conference was quite a lot about his own personal story, which I think personally is admirable. He needed to tell a story, though, with real bite and purchase on the nation about why the Conservatives uniquely are the party to take the country forward for the next 5 years and why Labour are not. And he's missing that macro picture, and the macro picture he alighted on was really too granular and too divisive. But I think it's very difficult for him. I think he's got many of the qualities. Ironically, were he to serve a second term, which I think now is less and less likely, I think he would blossom in time to be a really good prime minister, knowing what to do in power. But at the moment, coming into power when you are 70 for 9 down, if that, to use a cricket analogy or similar analogy with the rugby last night, he just doesn't have a hope.
It's so interesting to look at how Rishi Sunak is trying to pitch himself now as a new man, as a change candidate. Have we seen in the history of the office of Prime Minister ever such an audacious about-turn, rebranding midway through a term to say that you should vote to stick with me if you want to change things?
Well, the truth is, and this will come as a shock horror to party strategists and pollsters, is that rebranding never works. You've either got it. I mean, we got Thatcher at the beginning, we got Blair at the beginning, we got Churchill at the beginning, we got Clement Attlee, Lloyd George at the beginning. They didn't go in for rebrands because every fibre of their personality, their backstory, their life on Earth tells a story. It's authentically true. And I think if Rishi Sunak had maybe been able, to study more history, history is always something that the great prime ministers have an intuitive understanding of, or indeed spent more time just to stand back and reflect on what his opportunity was taking over from that very low moment after Liz Truss. He could have come up with a more coherent story, which he then could have stuck to. His 5 targets that he had were too micro and were obviously ill-advised because he's not able to achieve them. It's about politics and success in politics. It's about emotion. It's about being able to get somebody. And it's hard at the moment to get what Rishi Sunak, still more the Conservatives, stand for.
Hello there, welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast. I'm Craig Snell. Well, looking ahead to tonight, for most of us it should be largely dry, but it's going to turn quite chilly. Could even see some icy patches across the north. That's all down to this ridge of high pressure which is just building in for a brief time, settling the weather down, albeit very briefly. As you can see, this next area, low pressure, just waiting out in the Atlantic. So as we end Sunday, most of us will end on a largely dry and clear note. Still the risk of a few showers across some western parts, but under the clear skies, especially across parts of Scotland, the far north of England, we could just see a few icy stretches. So just be aware if you are out and about, and just take a little bit extra time on your journeys. So as we start Monday morning, most of us starts off on a fairly bright note. A few mist and fog patches possibly first thing. But for most of us, it's going to be a largely dry and bright day. Risk of some rain at times for Northern Ireland, maybe the far west of Wales, southwest England too. And all the time, the best of sunshine really up across parts of Scotland. And for most of us, temperatures throughout the day very similar to what we've seen over the weekend. Into Tuesday, a very different day for a large part of the UK. Rather cloudy with some outbreaks of rain, but that rain could potentially be fairly heavy across eastern parts of England. Best of sunshine into the afternoon down towards southwest England, and actually a good part of Scotland staying largely dry. But that really sets us up for an unsettled middle part of the week. Temperatures generally around average.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday the 29th of October at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Lisa Hartle in the GB News room. Gaza has been hit with a fresh wave of airstrikes. A number of explosions have been seen after Israel issued a warning to residents to leave the area. Leaflets were dropped in the north of the Strip saying if they stayed, their life was in danger and they may be identified as terrorist sympathisers. Earlier, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu told troops the war against Hamas is do or die for his country. A second convoy carrying humanitarian aid had to abort a delivery into Gaza earlier. Witnesses say they heard a blast and the sound of ambulances near the Rafah crossing. Yesterday, 20 trucks delivered supplies to the Strip after the border with Egypt was opened for the first time in 2 weeks. In London, an Israel solidarity rally was held earlier in Trafalgar Square. The Bring Them Home protest called for the release of all hostages being held by Hamas. The Israel Defense Forces now says there are 218 people being detained in Gaza. Earlier, a man was arrested for allegedly shouting anti-Semitic abuse from a car driving past. It comes after days of pro-Palestinian protests and claims that some people have been inciting violence. Immigration Minister Robert Jenrick says the accusations are being taken seriously.
I've written to all chief constables across the country saying that they should refer individuals that come to their attention to the Home Office. There is a legal process to be followed, but as and when we receive those, we will consider them, and if they meet the legal bar, then we will absolutely revoke and expel them, and the first case is already under consideration.
In other news, 2 danger-to-life weather warnings have been issued in England in the wake of Storm Babet. Severe flood alerts are in place around the River Idle near Retford in Nottinghamshire, which is expected to reach record levels. The number of people who have died during the storm has risen to 4 after police found the body of 83-year-old Maureen Gilbert in Chesterfield. Manchester United has opened a book of condolence at Old Trafford following the death of Sir Bobby Charlton. The legendary footballer was a key member of England's World Cup winning team in 1966. Floral tributes and football shirts are being placed